In this third episode of The Making of Pakistan, Unpacking the Roots of a Nation, we cover Chapter 2 of K.K. Aziz's influential work, spanning pages 39 to 69. Welcome back to another deep dive.
Great to be digging in again. We're continuing our look at the forces shaping the subcontinent. And today, we're really focusing on that critical time between the initial post-WWI reforms and when Pakistan became the official goal.
All right, so we're using these specific pages from Aziz to unpack the whole constitutional journey, the political back and forth, and how Muslim political thought was evolving during these really quite crucial decades.
Exactly. It's all about those complex interactions, isn't it? British reforms, Congress ambitions, and this Muslim political thinking that, as Aziz argues, ultimately leads towards separation.
Okay, let's get into it. We start after the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms, around 1919. These were meant to bring in a bit more self-government, right?
That was the idea. They brought in this system called Dyarchy in the provinces. It's a bit complex, but think of it as splitting government powers. Some areas, like, say, education or health, went to Indian ministers who answered to elected legislatures.
But the big stuff.
Yes, the crucial stuff. Finance, law, and order that stayed reserved. That means under the control of the British governor and his team, who weren't accountable to the elected body.
So it was like training wheels for self-government. That was the stated aim anyway.
Pretty much. Get Indian politicians used to the system before maybe handing over more. But, and this is a key point Aziz makes right away, the demand for the next step, for more reforms, started almost immediately. Dyarchy barely got going before people were pushing for more.
The 1919 Act had a 10-year review built in, but the pressure cooker was already on.
Exactly. They had to move the review forward because the demands were so insistent.
And that brings us to the Simon Commission, set up early in 1927. But it hit a massive snag right out of the gate.
A huge snag, and Aziz really flags this. The problem, it was an all-British commission. 0 Indians involved in reviewing India's constitution.
Which caused, as Aziz puts it, acute disappointment. Why was that such a flashpoint?
Well, for many Indian leaders, it felt like a major insult, like Britain was saying, you're not capable of discussing your own future. It felt like a decision was just going to be handed down.
Were there counter-arguments?
Oh, yes, and the source mentions them. Things like, well, it's a parliamentary commission reporting back to the British Parliament. And also, the difficulty of picking Indian members given the deep divisions within India at the time. Who would you choose? How would they agree?
Still, the reaction was strong. How did India respond?
It split things wide open. The main legislative assembly and the Congress party decided to boycott it completely. Jinnah's wing of the Muslim League initially joined the boycott too.
But not everyone boycotted.
No. The upper house, the Council of State, decided to cooperate. And significantly, a separate faction of the Muslim League, led by Sir Muhammad Shafi, also chose to work with the commission.
Why did Shafi's group and other cooperating Muslims decide to engage? What was their thinking?
Aziz lays out their concerns. A big one was that Congress was actively campaigning in Britain against separate electorates, something many Muslims felt was absolutely non-negotiable for their political survival.
So they felt they had to present their case.
Exactly. To counter the Congress narrative, they saw separate electorates as essential protection, frankly distrusting that the Hindu majority would look out for them without that safeguard. Cooperating seemed the only way to make sure the British heard their side directly.
Okay, this division sets the stage for what Aziz portrays as a really pivotal event, the Nehru Report of 1928.
Yeah, this report emerges from the boycotting groups. They formed an all-parties conference, basically trying to answer Lord Birkenhead's challenge. He'd basically dared Indians to produce a unified constitutional plan.
Motilal Nehru led the committee. But Aziz points out something important about who was on it, especially the Muslim members.
He does. He notes there were 2 Muslim members, but they were widely seen as unrepresentative of mainstream Muslim opinion. In fact, Aziz says they were repudiated by most Muslims. The Sikh member was apparently also disowned later, so the committee's makeup itself was contentious.
And the recommendations, what did the report actually propose?
It went for a fully responsible government based on majority rule, and the real bombshell, especially for Muslims, the immediate abolition of separate Muslim electorates.
Wow. How did that go down with the broader Muslim community?
According to Aziz, it shocked them into unity. This wasn't just a policy disagreement. It felt like an existential threat to their political position. Muslim leaders, different factions, even those who'd initially disagreed on Simon, came together to reject the report forcefully. The Aga Khan called the proposals degrading.
So, near unanimous Muslim opposition, how did Congress react to that?
They didn't compromise. They basically adopted the report wholesale and then issued an ultimatum to the British: accept this report by the end of 1929 or face mass civil disobedience.
So, for Muslims looking at this, it wasn't just a theoretical document anymore.
Not at all. Aziz argues this is the point where the Hindu-Muslim political divide becomes final and irrevocable. The Nehru Report seemed to confirm their worst fears about a future Hindu Raj under majority rule.
Especially abandoning separate electorates, which had been agreed upon before.
Yes, even by Congress in the 1916 Lucknow Pact. To Muslims, it felt like a complete turnaround, a betrayal. Aziz suggests that after this, Congress was increasingly seen by Muslims not as a national movement for all Indians, but as fundamentally a Hindu organization aiming for dominance and archenemy, as he puts it.
It sounds like more than just a political blunder.
That's precisely Aziz's point. He argues, quite provocatively, that the Nehru Report, while seeming like a disaster for Muslims at the time, ended up being a blessing in disguise for Muslim nationalism.
How so?
Because by starkly presenting what they saw as a future under Hindu domination, it forced Muslims to unite like never before. It powerfully boosted that sense of a separate Muslim identity and political destiny, even if the name Pakistan wasn't yet the focus. The seeds were being deeply sown here.
Right, so from that point of deep division, we move towards attempts to figure out some kind of federal structure, like the Roundtable conferences in London.
Exactly. Following the Simon Report, which interestingly had already questioned if India could be seen as a single nation, like in Europe, these three conferences were held between 1930 and 1933.
Congress missed the first and third, but Gandhi attended the second. What was the experience like for the Muslim delegates, according to Aziz?
He suggests they felt sidelined. They felt their specific worries about safeguards and their position didn't get the same weight as the broader push for self-government from the Congress side. They were apparently quite annoyed when the British PM, Ramsay MacDonald, basically told Hindus and Muslims to sort out the communal issue themselves.
Why annoyed? Hadn't they been trying?
Yes, for decades, without success. They felt the British, having fostered separate electorates, now had a responsibility to help resolve the impasse, not just throw it back at them.
So what happened at that second conference, the one Gandhi attended?
The communal question was front and center. The Aga Khan was leading negotiations for the minorities. But Gandhi, representing Congress, reportedly wouldn't budge unless the Nehru Report's principles were accepted first. Deadlock.
Which led to?
It led to all the minority groups present, except the Sikhs, putting forward a joint statement, essentially. Aziz calls it a Bill of Minority Rights. They basically asked the British government to step in and make a decision on the communal representation issue since they couldn't agree among themselves.
And what were the core demands Muslims were making around this time coming out of their own conferences like the All India Muslim Conference in '31?
They were pushing hard for strong provinces, maximum provincial autonomy with leftover powers, residual powers, staying with the provinces, not going to the center. Specific things, too, like separating Sindh from Bombay, giving the Northwest Frontier province full provincial status, reforms in Baluchistan.
And critically, keeping separate electorates.
Absolutely. Separate electorates, weightage, meaning slightly more seats than their population percentage warranted to give them a voice, safeguards against laws that might discriminate against them, a fair share of government jobs and cabinet positions, and crucially, a rule that the Constitution couldn't be changed without the provinces agreeing.
Aziz sees a deeper strategy behind these demands, particularly the focus on the Northwest.
Yes, he interprets this package, especially strengthening the provinces in the Northwest where Muslims were a majority, as fundamentally about securing control over a territory. The goal was twofold: protect Muslim culture and religion in their majority areas, and potentially use that power as leverage the mutual retaliation idea to ensure fair treatment for Muslims scattered in Hindu-majority provinces.
He connects this to Iqbal's 1930 speech.
Explicitly, he says this shows Muslim nationalism was evolving, coming to the point of demanding a territory.
But the second conference failed on this communal issue, leading to the British Communal Award and then eventually the White Paper proposals in 1933.
Right, and Muslims still had major objections to the White Paper because, again, it proposed a fairly strong central government, which they feared would be Hindu-dominated. They kept pushing for a weaker center, stronger provinces.
This all fed into the long process that created the Government of India Act of 1935.
It did. And Aziz characterizes the federal structure in the 1935 Act as leaning towards a closer type of federation, where he feels Hindu Unitarianism, the preference for a strong unified center, had kind of won out in the design of the central legislature.
So the main Muslim objection was still the strong center.
That was the core of it. A strong center meant, in their view, more power for the Hindu majority at the national level, potentially overriding the autonomy of Muslim-majority provinces.
How did the main parties react to this huge piece of legislation, the 1935 Act?
The Muslim League formally rejected the federal part of the act as fundamentally bad. But pragmatically, they decided to work the provincial part for what it is worth, meaning contest provincial elections.
And Congress.
Congress rejected both the federal and provincial parts on principle, but they too decided to contest the provincial elections with the explicit aim of getting inside the system to wreck the Constitution from the inside.
And they were very successful in those 1937 provincial elections, winning clear majorities in 8 provinces. This kicks off the period of Congress rule, 1937 to 1939, which Aziz sees as absolutely critical.
Immensely significant, and it started with controversy. Congress, having won, initially refused to actually form governments.
Why? What was their condition?
They demanded an assurance that the provincial governors wouldn't use their special powers, the very safeguards built into the act, partly to protect minorities.
Okay, so why was that demand so alarming for Muslims?
Because, as Aziz explains, Muslims had only accepted the 1935 Act, however grudgingly, because those safeguards existed. Things like the governor's power to step in if minority rights were threatened. When Congress demanded these powers be effectively suspended, it looked like they wanted total unchecked power.
It confirmed their fears about a potential Hindu Raj.
Exactly. It seemed like an attempt to dismantle the very constitutional protections they were relying on. Arguments were made against it. It was unconstitutional. It ignored Parliament's authority. The safeguards were there for a reason, but Congress held out.
Until the viceroy gave some kind of assurance?
Yes, Viceroy Linlithgow eventually gave an assurance about the use of these powers, and Congress took office. But Aziz stresses the fact that Congress made that demand in the first place was full of omen. It really heightened Muslim fears that had already been stoked by the Nehru Report and Congress attitudes.
Aziz says Congress coming to power was a new chapter that showed Muslims what this meant to them. What were the key features of Congress rule, according to his account?
A few things stand out in Aziz's analysis. One was the feeling that provincial ministers weren't really accountable to their local legislatures, but took orders directly from the central Congress high command. This tight party control, aimed at unifying the nationalist movement, was criticized by some observers, who likened it to authoritarian systems and felt it undermined provincial autonomy.
And the issue of sharing power with the Muslim League.
That's crucial. Despite manifestos being quite similar on many issues, Congress flatly refused to form coalition governments with the Muslim League in provinces where the League had significant support. The condition was basically dissolve the League and join Congress.
And Congress claimed its few Muslim members represented all Muslims.
They did, which the League obviously rejected, pointing to election results where they'd won the majority of Muslim seats contested. This refusal to share power was seen as deeply exclusionary.
So how did Muslims generally experience these 2 years under Congress governments?
Aziz argues it brought home, for many, the extent and depth of Hindu hostility, or at least a perception of widespread hostility and discrimination. This led to Muslim groups compiling reports documenting alleged atrocities. The Pirpur Report, the Sharif Report are famous examples cited.
Can you give an example or two of the kinds of things alleged in these reports?
The source mentions things like a breakdown of law and order in some places, alleged political interference in the justice system by local Congress officials, and cultural or religious flashpoints. One specific example cited is a directive supposedly issued for Muslim schoolboys to worship a portrait of Gandhi, which was seen as deeply offensive religiously.
Whether all these allegations were accurate or exaggerated is one thing, but the perception was powerful.
Immensely powerful. And Aziz's conclusion on this period is blunt. He says during Congress rule, there was every sign that the new constitution signified a Hindu Raj, pure and simple.
And this experience, this perception, is what Aziz argues connects directly to the demand for Pakistan.
Yes, this is the linchpin of his argument for this period. The 1937-39 Congress rule, he contends, proved to Muslims that constitutional safeguards, governor's powers, all the checks and balances in the 1935 Act were ultimately not effective protection against what they feared. becoming a permanent, dominated minority in a Hindu-majority India.
How did this change the thinking of someone like Jinnah?
Aziz notes a significant shift in Jinnah's outlook after 37. Seeing Congress wield power in the provinces made the implications clear. If that same party controlled a strong central government, as they desired, then Muslim provincial autonomy, even in their majority areas, would be meaningless. The center could always interfere or overrule.
So if Congress insisted on a strong, unitary center,
Then the Muslim response, as Aziz frames it, became increasingly logical from their perspective. Either have no center at all, just autonomous provinces, or if the Hindus were going to have their strong center, Muslims needed their own separate strong center.
which is partition.
Essentially, yes. Aziz puts it starkly. Partition. The Muslim reply to Hindu Unitarianism, and Pakistan, the Muslim retort to Hindu hegemony. The experience of Congress rule made separation seem like the only viable path to security and self-determination.
Okay, let's trace the specific idea of a separate Muslim entity. Aziz goes back to Sir Muhammad Iqbal's 1930 Allahabad address.
Right. Iqbal, the famous poet and philosopher, argued forcefully that Western-style majority-rule democracy wasn't suited for India's diverse reality. He declared Muslims were a distinct nation, and his proposal was quite specific. Amalgamate Punjab, the northwest frontier province, Sindh, and Baluchistan into a single large state.
A consolidated Northwest Indian Muslim state.
That was his phrase. He saw this as the final destiny for Muslims, at least in that part of India.
But Aziz makes a careful distinction about what Iqbal actually proposed versus the later idea of Pakistan.
Yes, this is a really important clarification in the source. Aziz argues Iqbal was advocating for a consolidated Muslim bloc or state within a larger Indian federation, not a completely separate independent country outside of it. Iqbal also didn't include the Muslim-majority areas of Bengal and Assam in his vision.
So Aziz thinks calling Iqbal the father of Pakistan is a bit of a myth.
He does use that word. He suggests Iqbal's goal was more about creating a strong, unified Muslim unit to bargain more effectively inside India, rather than breaking away entirely.
So where did the idea of a fully independent Pakistan and the name itself come from?
According to Aziz, that originates with Trahari Ramat Ali and some fellow Muslim students in Cambridge, England, around 1932-33. They formed the Pakistan National Movement.
And their proposal was different.
Radically different. In their pamphlet, Now or Never, they called for a totally independent Muslim state, Pakistan made up of Punjab, NWFP, which they called Afghania, Kashmir, Sindh, and Baluchistan. The name itself was coined from the initials, also meaning land of the pure. This state was to be completely separate from the rest of India.
And Ramat Ali himself drew this distinction.
Yes, he emphasized his idea was fundamentally different from Iqbal's a separate federation versus a consolidated bloc within a federation. Interestingly, though, when the mainstream Muslim League leaders were asked about this Pakistan scheme in London around 1933-34,
What did they say?
they basically dismissed it. Aziz quotes them, telling the British Parliamentary Committee that no responsible Muslim leader was proposing it, calling the idea chimerical and impracticable, a flight of fancy.
Which shows the idea of full independence wasn't immediately embraced by the League leadership.
Exactly. Aziz's point is that this radical idea of a separate Pakistan didn't gain real traction or become the League's official policy in India until after that watershed experience of Congress rule between 1937 and 1939.
Which brings us squarely to the Lahore Resolution of March 1940. This is the moment it becomes official.
This is the landmark moment Aziz identifies. He points out that the earlier schemes, whether Iqbal's internal bloc or Ramat Ali's independent state, hadn't captured the official backing of the All India Muslim League or fired the imagination of the Muslim masses. It was at Lahore in 1940 that the League officially adopted for the first time the policy of partitioning India.
What was the core demand laid out in the resolution?
It stated that geographically connected areas where Muslims formed a majority, specifically in the northwestern and eastern zones of India, should be grouped to constitute independent states. It also crucially said the constituent units within these states should be autonomous and sovereign.
So this was it, the point of no return, in a sense.
That's how Aziz portrays it. The Muslims had taken the final plunge into demanding complete separation. Muslim nationalism, in his view, had reached full maturity and was now demanding a territory of its own.
Now, an interesting angle Aziz brings in is that while 1940 was the official adoption, the idea of a separate Muslim political future wasn't entirely pulled out of thin air. Some British observers had been noticing the potential for years.
Right, this adds some important context. Aziz compiles quite a list of observations from British officials, journalists, academics, people closely watching India, dating back even to the mid-1920s. They weren't necessarily predicting Pakistan by name, but they were sensing the potential for a major split or the emergence of a distinct Muslim political bloc in the Northwest.
Can you give us a flavor of these observations? Who was saying what?
Well, you have figures like William Archbold, a principal at Aligarh back in 1925, talking about a possible powerful Mohammedan combination. A Times correspondent in 1928 foresaw a solid Muslim bloc effectively ruling the North. Academics like Sir Theodore Morrison in the early 30s were already calling Hindus and Muslims two nationalities and floating the idea of a Muslim state.
Even policymakers.
Yes, people like the Marquess of Zetland, who later became Secretary of State for India, noted the strategic potential of a chain of Muslim provinces in the Northwest in 1931. By the late 30s, you see publications like The Economist talking about Muslim India and Congress India and discussing the growing momentum for Pakistan.
So Aziz's point is that the Lahore Resolution, while definitive for the League, shouldn't have been a complete shock to well-informed observers.
Precisely. He argues that by 1939, the possibility of a partitioned India had definitely entered the realm of practical politics, at least in the minds of those paying close attention. It wasn't just a fringe idea anymore.
Okay, let's recap then. Why did this demand for Pakistan crystallize and become official League policy in 1940? What were the core drivers, according to Aziz?
The absolute main driver, as Aziz presents it, was that desperate apprehension, that deep-seated fear of being dominated by the Hindu majority in a united India. Pakistan was the direct answer to Congress's push for a strong unitary state based on simple majority rule.
And the Congress rule period was the catalyst.
Absolutely critical. It seemed to prove that the safeguards in the 1935 Act wouldn't work in practice. And later, the Congress' insistence on the Constituent Assembly's absolute sovereignty was seen as the last straw, a mechanism to impose a Hindu-majority constitution.
So Muslims shifted from asking for protection as a minority to demanding recognition as a nation.
Exactly. They were saying, we are not a minority, we are a nation, and we have the right to rule ourselves in our homeland. When people raised the issue of minorities left behind in both countries, the response, Aziz notes, was partly based on this idea of mutual retaliation ensuring fair treatment, but more fundamentally about achieving dignity and self-respect for Muslims in their own state.
It's a dramatic evolution traced by Aziz, from seeking British help to a brief alliance with Hindus to fighting for safeguards, finally culminating in this assertive nationalism demanding a separate territory.
And Jinnah's role in reframing the entire problem was key. He argued India wasn't one nation with a minority problem, but an international problem between two distinct nations requiring separation.
This newly officialized demand then gets a major, perhaps unexpected boost in 1942 with the Cripps Offer.
Aziz calls this moment a greatest victory for the Muslim League's cause. Not because they accepted the offer itself, but because the British War Cabinet, facing the pressures of World War II, essentially conceded the principle of Pakistan.
How did they do that? What was the mechanism?
It was a specific part of the proposals Sir Stafford Cripps brought, the non-accession clause. This stated that any province unwilling to join the new Indian Union proposed after the war could opt out and form its own separate government, potentially joining later or staying independent.
That sounds like a huge step towards acknowledging the possibility of Pakistan.
Major, if not a complete, concession is how Aziz describes it. Now, the Muslim League actually rejected the Cripps offer. In the end, they felt it didn't go far enough, was too vague, maybe didn't guarantee Pakistan clearly enough. But the crucial thing, Aziz argues, is that within just 2 years of Lahore, London had officially and publicly accepted the spirit of Muslim nationalism and agreed to its political manifestation, Pakistan.
And this must have given the League enormous confidence.
Immense confidence. It validated their core demand on the world stage and made Pakistan seem achievable. Aziz briefly mentions possible British motives needing wartime support, maybe trying to pressure Congress, influence from sympathetic figures, but the historical impact of that acceptance was huge.
So with Pakistan now seemingly within the realm of possibility, as Aziz puts it, the League focuses on building its political muscle between 1942 and 1944.
Yes, the focus shifted to building military power, meaning political strength and organization. Aziz describes this period as one where the League really worked on improving its structure, its messaging, tightening party discipline, and spreading the Pakistan idea far and wide.
And they got some unintentional help from Congress.
They did. Aziz points to Congress's miscalculations, especially launching the Quit India movement in 1942 after Cripps failed. This led to mass arrests, jailing virtually the entire Congress leadership.
Leaving the field open for the League.
Pretty much. With their main political opponents locked up, Jinnah and the League had a relatively clear run for a couple of years to consolidate support, organize, and get their message out without facing constant opposition campaigning.
And Jinnah himself opposed Quit India.
Very strongly.
Yes.
He framed it as being as much anti-Muslim as anti-British, arguing it was an attempt by Congress to sideline Muslims and seize power for Hindus under the guise of fighting the British.
This period of League consolidation, with Jinnah's stature rising, leads to the Jinnah-Gandhi talks in 1944.
Right. Once Gandhi was released from prison, there was pressure on him to engage with Jinnah and the League. C. Rajagopalachari, a senior Congress figure often called CR, played a key role here. He'd actually come around to accepting partition as potentially necessary.
And he proposed the CR formula, which was basically a Congress-linked proposal for partition.
Yes, a significant development. The formula suggested partition could happen, but only after the British left. And crucially, it would depend on a plebiscite, a vote, in the disputed Muslim-majority areas. But, and this was key, the vote would be by all inhabitants, Muslims and non-Muslims alike.
The talks failed. Why? What was the sticking point, according to Aziz?
Fundamentally, it came down to trust, or the lack of it. Aziz emphasizes the deep Muslim mistrust of Congress intentions by this point. Jinnah insisted that the principle of Pakistan had to be conceded, and its implementation agreed upon before the British departure. He simply didn't trust that Congress would follow through on partition once they held the reins of an independent, united India. The plebiscite involving non-Muslims was also unacceptable.
But even though the talks failed, Aziz argues they yielded solid advantages for the League.
Yes, several key things. Firstly, by negotiating directly and extensively with Jinnah as the primary Muslim leader, Congress implicitly weakened its own claim to represent all Indians, effectively acknowledging the League's powerful position. Secondly, the talks highlighted just how deep and seemingly unbridgeable the differences were. And thirdly, the sheer publicity surrounding the talks gave massive exposure to Jinnah's two-nation theory and the demand for Pakistan.
Okay, another attempt to break the impasse comes with the Simla Conference in 1945.
This was Viceroy Wavell's plan. He tried to form an interim executive council, basically a temporary government, with a specific formula, equal proportion of Muslims and caste Hindus.
And this failed too, famously because Jinnah insisted on two things.
That's right. Parity between Muslims and caste Hindus was one point, which Congress actually conceded for this specific arrangement. But Jinnah also insisted that the Muslim League and only the League must nominate all the Muslim members of the council.
Why was this second demand so critical for Jinnah and unacceptable for Congress?
For Jinnah, it was about asserting the League's claim as the sole representative body for Muslim India, a claim central to the demand for Pakistan. If other Muslim groups or Congress's own Muslim members were included, it would undermine that claim. For Congress, accepting this would mean admitting they were just a Hindu party, contradicting their identity as a national movement for all communities.
Aziz also mentions Jinnah had a further calculation regarding the council's internal balance.
Yes, even with parity between the League's nominees and caste Hindus, Jinnah realized Muslims would still be outnumbered in the council overall because other groups represented, like Sikhs, Christians, etc., generally sided with Congress on the unity issue. He was effectively looking for parity between Muslims and all other groups combined to prevent decisions constantly going against the League's interests, especially regarding Pakistan.
So Jinnah prioritized the principle of Pakistan over getting seats.
That's Aziz's reading. Jinnah feared taking seats in the council under Wavell's terms would mean the fundamental Pakistan issue will be shelved. Aziz sees the argument over seats as a sham battle. The real fight was about who would succeed Britain, and the clash between Congress's claim to national status and the League's demand for Pakistan based on separate nationhood.
And the failure really underlined the need to test these competing claims of representation.
Which led directly, inevitably, to the general elections of 1945-46. Aziz says these were fought on the simplest conceivable programs.
Extremely clear platforms. The Muslim League, we represent all Muslims, Pakistan's the only answer. Congress, we represent all of India, independence means a united India.
The choice put before the voters was stark, as Aziz puts it. Pakistan versus Akan Hindustan,
Yeah.
United India.
And the results. Aziz calls them both illuminating and confusing.
Illuminating because the verdict within each community was overwhelming. The Muslim League won absolutely every single Muslim seat in the central legislature, and a massive majority, something like 428 out of 492 of provincial Muslim seats. Congress achieved similarly crushing victories in the general non-Muslim constituencies.
So crystal clear mandates for both sides within their respective spheres. But confusing because
Because it just solidified the deadlock. The election proved the League's claim to represent Muslims and Congress's dominance among Hindus, but it also showed the political division was incredibly deep, making compromise seem even harder. The mandates were clear, but utterly opposed.
this clear mandate for the League, especially among Muslims, leads to the final major British initiative, the Cabinet Mission in 1946.
Yes, this was seen as the last real push to find a negotiated settlement, to try and keep India united if at all possible. 3 British cabinet ministers came out for expensive talks.
And after all those talks, what was the mission's own conclusion about Pakistan?
They explicitly ruled out the creation of a sovereign state of Pakistan, as demanded by the League, deeming it not a practical possibility.
What were their main reasons for rejecting it, according to Aziz's account?
They acknowledged the genuine Muslim anxiety about majority rule, but they raised several practical objections. They argued Pakistan wouldn't solve the minority problem. You'd still have huge non-Muslim minorities in the proposed Pakistan areas and vice versa. They worried about dividing Punjab and Bengal against the wishes of many inhabitants. They pointed to the disruption of integrated transport and communication systems, weaker defense for the subcontinent overall, problems with the princely states, and the sheer geographical impracticality of a state split into 2 wings thousands of miles apart.
How did Jinnah take this rejection of his core demand?
It's not well. Aziz notes Jinnah expressed deep regret, calling the mission's arguments against Pakistan commonplace and exploded. He felt they were making excuses, engaging in special pleading, essentially, to satisfy the Congress preference for unity. Aziz himself offers a critique here. He concedes some of the mission's points were valid, but argues their proposed alternative, complex 3-tier system of provinces, regional groups, and a limited center ultimately fell short because it didn't grant the sovereignty the League, backed by that huge electoral mandate, was demanding. He speculates that perhaps the mission underestimated just how powerful Muslim nationalism had become, maybe thinking that because Pakistan seemed illogical to them, the demand wasn't truly irresistible. In the end, their plan failed to get full agreement and resolve the crisis.
With the cabinet mission plan failing and the deadlock absolute, things accelerated rapidly towards partition in 1947.
Yes, the situation was deteriorating fast. The new viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, arrived in early 1947 and, according to Aziz, very quickly concluded by April or May that partition was now simply unavoidable.
What finally convinced him? What factors does Aziz highlight?
Several things converging. The alarming spread of brutal Hindu-Muslim communal violence across large parts of India, the complete breakdown of trust and functioning within the interim coalition government where Congress and League ministers barely spoke, Congress's continued insistence that the Constituent Assembly, which the League was boycotting, was sovereign and could write India's future. And of course, the unwavering Muslim League demand for Pakistan, now clearly backed by the election results.
Mountbatten saw it as needing a surgical operation.
That's the phrase Aziz uses to capture Mountbatten's perspective, that the situation was so bad, the conflict so intractable, that only a quick, clean break partition could prevent even greater chaos and bloodshed. London agreed by the end of May 1947.
Leading to the final step.
Yeah.
The partition plan announced on June 3rd, 1947.
Yes, outlining the mechanism for dividing British India into India and Pakistan. And Aziz notes it was immediately accepted by all parties, albeit with different degrees of enthusiasm.
How did the different players react, according to the source?
The British government accepted it as the only way out. Congress, representing primarily Hindu sentiment, accepted under protest. They still fundamentally wanted a united India, but saw partition as the lesser evil compared to civil war. The Muslim League was not displeased. They had achieved their central goal of Pakistan, although they deeply resented the concurrent division of Punjab and Bengal, which meant losing significant Muslim populations and territory to India. The Sikhs strongly opposed the partition of Punjab, which divided their community, but politically had little choice but to acquiesce.
It's really quite a trajectory we followed here, drawing on Aziz's account. From those early tentative steps towards self-governance, through the mounting distrust fueled by things like the Nehru Report, the pivotal experience of Congress rule hardening attitudes, the demand for Pakistan becoming official policy, and then the failure of all attempts at compromise leading finally to the acceptance of partition.
Yeah, Aziz really emphasizes those moments. The Nehru Report shocking Muslims into greater unity. The 1937-39 period demonstrating the perceived inadequacy of safeguards as absolutely crucial in shifting the Muslim political goal from seeking security within India to demanding separation from India. His narrative builds a strong case for how these specific historical experiences propelled the movement towards Pakistan.
It definitely leaves you thinking about the forces at play. Considering the dynamics, Aziz lays out the different conceptions of nationhood, the breakdown of trust, the seemingly irreconcilable demands that emerged particularly after 1937. You have to wonder, was a united India even a realistic possibility by the late 1930s or early 1940s? Or had the path towards some form of separation become perhaps almost unavoidable due to these clashing historical currents?
That sense of inevitability, driven by the collision of these two powerful nationalisms, certainly comes through strongly in Aziz's interpretation of this period.
A complex legacy and definitely food for thought as you continue to explore this critical era in South Asian history.